Next to all of the amazing games released during the 16-bit generation, it was also the anticipation for up-and-coming technologies that made this era so exciting. Thanks to advancements in different technological areas, gaming would change forever. But which technology would be leading and which would turn out to be a short-lived fad were up for speculation. There were a number of incentives for game companies to adapt these new technologies, ranging from enhancing the public image to gaining experience in these new fields. One of the undeniable trends was the advent of CD-ROM storage. Sega's competitor, NEC, had released a CD-ROM add-on as early as 1988. Shortly after, Sega's consumer hardware team would start making plans for their own CD expansion. They quickly realized their original plans weren't sufficient. More RAM and a faster CPU were required to make it work. In addition, a few extra bells and whistles were added, leading to more possibilities, but not without some caveats. The system was first demoed in the summer of 1991 at the Tokyo Toy Show, and released half a year later in Japan. With its hefty price tag, it was set in the market as a high-end device for the most wealthy and hardcore Sega fans. It would take a while before the first quality exclusive titles hit the market, as for most third parties it wasn't considered a lucrative market. The consumer division at Sega could also just spare a small portion of their resources on game development for the Mega CD. But the one thing the system couldn't do without was a game featuring their new company mascot, Sonic the Hedgehog. The first Sonic game was a massive success for Sega. Development of the sequel had moved over to Sega's US-based development studio, involving the original crew, with the exception of designer Naoto Ōshima, who had stayed in Japan. Ōshima had been largely responsible for the design of Sonic, and infused the series with the unique CGI art style. He had wanted to join his colleagues in the US, but was held back by Sega's president. Instead, the young talent Yasushi Yamaguchi was sent to lead graphic design on Sonic 2. When the idea arose for a Mega CD installment of Sonic, Ōshima would be the most qualified candidate to assemble a completely new development team at Sega of Japan. Pre-production for Sonic CD would start in '92, when Sonic 2 for the Mega Drive was in the middle of development. Compared to the Sonic 2 team in the US, Ōshima had more time and freedom, as much less depended on their title. First, Ōshima and his team started to think of a strong concept for Sonic CD, a concept that would make use of the storage space, but also add new flair to the proven gameplay. Time travel was considered as a mechanic for Sonic 2, but dropped due to time and memory constraints. Without having to deal with these limitations, it proved to be a perfect concept for Sonic CD. The story would take place on a confined new location called Little Planet, a place full of mystery with special stones that could alter time. However, their power could spell catastrophe if they fall into the hands of the evil scientist Dr. Robotnik. The core gameplay would stay true to the first installment, but the time mechanic added a new objective for the player. Each zone has 4 different realities: past, present, good future, and bad future. It was up to Sonic to travel to the past and destroy Robotnik's capsules to ensure a good future in each zone. As a reward, Sonic could travel to this new future and traverse through a less dangerous act without badniks, and ultimately unlock the game's true ending. It was Oshima's vision to have an almost seamless transition between realities, akin to Back to the Future. After passing a time post and having the right pace, sparks would trail Sonic and he would flash through time in an instant. This concept would demand a great deal of ingenuity from the programmers. The Mega CD had a sizable RAM buffer and its own fast CPU that handled the read instructions from CD-ROM and decompression. However, it could not directly access the Mega Drive itself. The Mega Drive CPU would have to copy data from the Mega CD RAM and pass it through to its own components, which noticeably slowed down the process. Although Ōshima really pushed for a seamless transition and the zone layouts had been carefully constructed to be compatible with each other, a short transition sequence ultimately had to be added to cover up the loading. The task of mapping out the zone layouts was handed to a group of game designers. Among them were Hiroaki Chino, who had co-designed Streets of Rage, and Akira Nishino, who later became a lead on Rystar. The zones are different in feel compared to the other classic Sonics. This partly had to do with the absence of the signature style of Hirokazu Yasuhara, who was busy working on Sonic 2 and 3 in the US. Under the lead of designer Hiroyuki Kawaguchi, 4 artists would be responsible for bringing the zones to life with their pixel art. An added challenge was to create a consistent look throughout all 4 time zones, yet make them feel different from each other. The art style would not stray far from the original Sonic due to Oshima's direction. Kazuyuki Hoshino took up the role of character artist, a role that Ōshima occupied in the original game. Hoshino majored in advertisement design and joined Sega in 1990. Sonic CD would be his first big project at the company. Ōshima wanted to introduce a new strong rival for Sonic in this new outing. As soon as Hoshino was briefed, he had a clear idea in his head. One of the keywords for this new rival was menacing. In almost all creative fields, design flows from a concept. Things not only had to look great, but also have meaning behind their design. His glowing red eyes was one of the first elements decided upon and would give him an intimidating, deadly look. The jet engine in his chest gave him the boost to compete with Sonic and enhance his threatening image. Finally, the glossy, reflective finish in line with the latest CGI trends made Metal Sonic feel cutting edge and a true menace and rival for Sonic. He would be advertised as such, and the two would take center stage on the box art. Hoshino would translate his final design into pixel art using Sega's digitizer system. The other addition to the cast was Amy Rose, a young female hedgehog with a romantic obsession with Sonic. Shaping her was a true team effort. Staff members from various departments contributed to her appearance. Ōshima added the hairpiece and sneakers, while Hoshino had a big hand in fleshing out her mannerisms and would make the final drawings and pixel art. To introduce Sonic's new adventure to the players, the team envisioned a fully animated intro sequence. The CD-ROM storage gave the team the capacity to do so, while Sonic's success granted them a budget to make it a reality. Cutscenes were an important way to enhance the game world in the mind of the player, and it gave them reference beyond just the in-game pixel art. Sega contracted Toei Animation, who subcontracted Studio Junio to help with production, which was a Tokyo-based support company who already had some experience in the field of games with projects like Time Gal and Punch-Out. The sequences were handcrafted, in line with most animations of that time. Animators would animate the characters frame by frame on paper. They were then traced on transparent animation cells and inked to create the final clean color image. The cells were photographed against the still background art and combined with additional layers like effects animation. When it came to transferring the sequences to a Mega CD compatible format, there were a couple of restrictions. First of all, graphics still needed to be passed through and produced by the Mega Drive video chip, meaning all of its limitations, such as available colors and resolution, were already in place. Secondly, the animations needed to be compressed to be able to stream them in real time from the CD. The cartoonish animations in Sonic CD were suitable for color reduction, and with just 16 colors per frame, the end result was still acceptable. The opening cinematic ultimately ended up occupying roughly 13 megabytes, which alone was already more than 8 times the size of the average game cartridge. The animated sequence was actually one of the earliest completed portions of Sonic CD. Perhaps the biggest advantage of the CD-ROM add-on was the ability to use CD-quality music. The CD format gave Sega's in-house sound team endless possibilities, but also higher expectations, as they could no longer hide behind hardware limitations. Naofumi Hataya was assigned to the project. The self-taught musician played in numerous bands since junior high, but was new to composing music on a computer when he joined Sega. He found the new challenge appealing and worked with Masafumi Okata to compose the bulk of the score. Their first attempts were not met with enthusiasm from director Ōshima. The early demos were too conventional. He'd envisioned a more edgy and modern sound, but most of all a strong concept. Hataya started researching how Sega and Sonic were received overseas. He discovered that the cool and trendy image blended in with all kinds of popular contemporary trends such as house music. This settled the idea to incorporate a club sound into the Sonic CD soundtrack, a genre that had just gained traction in Japan. The composers analyzed the work of Frankie Knuckles, groups like C&C Music Factory, and the KLF with their house, techno, and hip-hop influence. The Sega composers made good use of the various sample packs on the market. These were popular among house musicians of the early 90s, providing them with tons of loops and samples.
Work that sucker to death. Come on now, work that sucker to death.
The techno and club sound gave Sonic CD a modern feel and was well suited for the mechanical zones. But in the end, the overall theme of the level and the time frame would still be leading for the choice in music style. The music budget for Sonic CD by far surpassed that of any regular console game. The Sega sound team partnered with one of the most prolific production companies in Japan, who helped with the recording and mixing of the songs. It was a great learning curve for the Sega composers, getting to work with seasoned recording engineers and musicians. They were even able to use the talents of local singers Casey Rankin and Keiko Utoku, who provided vocals and lyrics for the opening and ending track. Burning the music as CD audio had one caveat, however: disk space. The same limitation as all other audio CDs was in place: a max recording time of roughly 74 minutes. Taking into account the game data and animated sequences would leave room for less than an hour of music. Although in the end there was space left on the disc, the team decided to program the tracks planned for the past time zones using the Mega CD's own audio chip. This extra audio chip was a very capable PCM chip used in some of their arcade boards. The past tunes were more simplistic in nature and were successfully handled by the new audio chip. Over in the US, production wrapped up for Sonic 2 after an intensive crunch period. The game hit store shelves worldwide on November 24, 1992. 2 weeks later, Sonic CD was first teased to a select audience in Japan during a Planet Sega World event held in Tokyo. Sega would showcase a number of their new games to their fans, including Sonic CD. The intro sequence and accompanying title song were met with great enthusiasm from the crowd. Magazines reported on the event and shared screenshots of the opening stage. This would ultimately be 9 months before the final release. Meanwhile, the Sonic CD team continued to work on the remaining levels. The game was initially planned for a spring '93 release, but this proved to be too ambitious and had to be pushed back to the fall season, even after dropping one of the planned zones. Along with the CD-ROM drive and new audio chip, the Mega CD had one final card up its sleeve: a dedicated graphics chip that allowed for scaling and rotation, effects that would be utilized to realize the scrolling clouds on the title screen. The chip would handle these visual effects and pass them through as an array of small animated tiles, a format that the Mega Drive video chip could handle and composite with all conventional graphic elements. The effects would truly shine in the game's 3D perspective special stages. Character artist Hoshino drew Sonic from all possible angles. Yasushi Yamaguchi, the lead graphic designer on Sonic 2 and creator of Tails, went back to Tokyo after finishing up Sonic 2. He joined Ōshima and the Sonic CD team halfway through production, and helped to design the backgrounds for the special stages. When the production crew was starting to hit the finish line, Joe Miller, head of Sega's new multimedia studio, was invited for a preview of the game. Despite the excellent work of Sega's sound team, he thought it was a great opportunity for their own music division to do something different for the US release. The next Monday morning, Miller pitched the idea to in-house composer Spencer Nilsson. Because the release of the game had already been scheduled, he had a mere 7 weeks to crunch out a completely new soundtrack. Spencer quickly assembled his team and attracted the San Francisco-based musician Mark Crew to help him out. While the Japanese team tied Sonic in with the latest club music, the US composers wanted to break away from these trends. They were going for a more funky and quirky sound, in line with how they viewed Sonic's colorful worlds. Mark Crew would tackle the music for Chaos Collision, the boss theme, and Metallic Madness Zone with its darker tone. The tracks for the past zones had to remain unaltered as they were handled by the Mega CD's audio chip. Composing and programming them would be too time-consuming. Spencer Nilsson would start to work on his own sound for the remainder of the soundtrack. While working on the score deep into the night, Joe Miller, who also happened to still be at work, paid him a visit. Together they discussed the project and started to brainstorm ideas. Miller brought up the new female character Amy, and soon they came up with the idea of using a female chorus. Miller recalled seeing a vocal jazz group a few weeks before named Pastiche, who would be perfect for Sonic. Spencer contacted them the next morning, and within days they would collaborate and record in Sega's studio. The three ladies would help to write the opening lyrics for the iconic Sonic Boom. And improvised their harmonies for various zones on the spot. Pastiche's unique sound helped shape Sonic CD's soundtrack for the US market, and was a perfect demonstration of the creative freedom of Sega of America at that time. Sonic CD was released in late September of '93 to great praise. Combined with Sonic Spinball and Sonic Chaos, it meant that Sega fans had enough Sonic games to choose from during the holiday season. The Mega CD was somewhat of a struggle for most developers. On one hand, there were high expectations from consumers and press, as it was often conceived as a more powerful system than it actually was. On the other hand, the small install base and added production cost made it a more risky financial endeavor. Many development companies had signed on, but only a few released actual products. The Mega CD was often seen as a transitional system by members of Sega, getting their feet wet in multimedia. From this point of view, it probably wasn't as fruitful as they wanted, as too little of their knowledge could be leveraged in the generations to follow. Both Sega's multimedia studio and the resurgence of interactive media from the 80s was short-lived. And yet, the system got some worthy releases from developers who leveraged its potential. The Sonic CD team, for example, wisely chose to not alter the proven gameplay and utilize the budget and the Mega CD features where they would be most effective. From the new graphics chip for implementing the special stages to the high-fidelity soundtrack and exciting opening and ending sequence, resulting in a beloved installment in the Sonic series.